Welcome to the Pelle, Neroth, Taylor and Martin Sieff show, Capitals Uncovered. And it's a Monday afternoon here in Europe. And there's a sort of schizophrenic nature of the headlines where people are cheering Britain's victory in Mexico, and there's all that kind of optimism. And as I said, people were watching the Henley Regatta, even as Franz Ferdinand was being assassinated, and Eastern Europe was rumbling with the tidings of war. So if you look at the alternative media, a lot of the commentators, the John Mearsheimers of the world, think that we're heading towards total war because the West is piling in the drones and even the medium-range missiles, and the Russians have just done an unprecedentedly strong attack on Kiev, following the takeout of a number of oil refineries, which look good or look bad, as it were, on the front pages of the Western press, and has convinced a lot of Western analysts, fake or not, I don't know, that Ukraine is winning. So just one more push and Russia will be defeated. But that's, of course, very far from the truth. But the point is whether this hubris will lead to escalation and counter-escalation. We've got one of the best experts out there, perhaps the best, on Russia and inside on Russian politics, John Helmer. What do you say to all this? And what's the significance of you put on your recent Dances with Bears blog about the Russian intelligence message, as it were, to both the Kremlin and to NATO. But just tell us what where you place yourself in this general rising gloom and pessimism among the alt media commentators.
Well, I can't say I'm optimistic on the optimistic end of the short war. I think we've been saying, or I say, and I think we all agree here, that that the best Russia can negotiate for, and that's been the view for some time, the General Staff, the Security Council, Defense Ministry, and I think the intelligence services, is a pause in the long war, the permanent war against Russia. The podcasters in the United States have switched 2 years ago. Let's say they were all gung-ho for Trump and the opportunities that Trump presented for themselves as job seekers. Several people on the Napolitano group wanted jobs in the Trump administration. Oh, yes. And either sought them or nearly got them or were rejected. In time, those individuals have come round to attacking Trump and biting the hand that didn't feed them. Yes. That doesn't convince me that they're particularly credible then or now. They're opportunists, and they're pitching at a market that's highly fickle. That's the podcast universe, and that's journalism anyway. But they are downplaying the amount of damage that the Ukrainian drone war, the US-guided, European supplied drone war, is doing to the Russian economy. They're downplaying it, as are the Russian state media. What I think one can say about that is that the Russian state media and the US podcasters who support them are minimizing the degree of damage. There's no doubt that there's a very serious loss of refinery capacity. That affects in every conceivable way the movement of automobiles during the summer tourist season, the domestic tourist season. It affects the supply of diesel for trucks. It affects the supply of jet fuel for aircraft. That's the entire logistic chain of transportation of people and goods. That's affected. It's not, as President Putin called it, critical. He has also played this down, as he sought in a speech at a command post on Friday, and in speeches or talks with government officials. He sought to play down, the president is playing down how, quotes, critical this is. Well, that's true too. The problem is we're in an election campaign. The election for the national parliament is on September 18 to 20. That's a very short distance away through the summer period, and the election campaign's underway. So jawboning that the crisis in fuel supply and the consequent rise in prices of domestic goods, including fuel, these developments are not critical, is a pitch at voters. It's a waste of breath. You can't pitch to voters when what they feel in their pocket is not critical, because the issue is how they'll vote from their pocket, just like Americans, Canadians, Europeans do. So Putin is trying to calm an electorate that's deeply upset in every conceivable way. And that's the context. Now, much of the damage to the Russian economy has been self-inflicted. It's been caused by the central bank governor, Elvira Nabiullina, whom Putin continues to protect. And she's supported by the finance minister, Anton Silvanov. And they have, in fact, said, and Nabiullina made a speech last week in St. Petersburg, which, if I were running a polity in an election period like this in Russia, ought to have gotten her fired. Basically, what she said was that because of external factors, there is a rise in inflationary expectations in the Russian domestic economy, and that will cause and lead to and have her decide to raise the central bank's key interest rate in order to combat inflation. She's also said in other speeches that she advocates cutting the budget deficit by reducing military expenditures. Now, you just don't campaign for re-election when you're promising to jack up the key interest rate, which will in fact cause it further recession in the economy. She's blamed the lack of productivity in the economy. She has publicly said that that businesses ought to be able to discharge inefficient workers more easily. This is the way the president of Russia is campaigning for re-election, playing up the need for higher unemployment, higher interest rates. This is absurd if you look at it politically in any context, and this is the way it's going in Russia. That's self-inflicted injury. The serious problem of drone warfare is different, but it's just as serious and just as fundamental. What is coming out now, what is meant by the Ukrainian US-guided, European financed and supplied drone war, is that it's no longer possible for the Russian side to achieve its aim of demilitarizing the Ukraine by the land advances across the 4 Novorossiya regions plus Crimea. The range of these drones is now more than 2,000 kilometers. To defend Russia in a post-war settlement would require a demilitarized zone as far west as the Polish border. Now, President Putin has spoken of improvements in the security zone. He spoke of this on Friday in his talks with front commanders and the chief of the general staff, General Valery Gerasimov. He spoke of a security zone being developed in Kharkov region, Sumy region, and Dnipropetrovsk region. Fine, they are advancing westward. They have yet to, the Russian forces have yet to consolidate the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. They're close to consolidating, but not yet the Donetsk region. They're fully consolidated the Lugansk region. But even if they extend to security zone in Kharkov, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk, that leaves the rest of the Ukraine, everything west of Dnipropetrovsk, from Kiev to the Polish border, capable of continuing as a drone platform. And the fact of the matter is that this is a war that the Europeans and the Americans and the Ukrainians will fight to the last Ukrainian. And when there are no more Ukrainians, they'll still be firing, using Ukraine as a platform against Russia as a permanent feature of war. The second part of the second long-term war aim is denazification of the Ukraine. That's been interpreted as elections for the Ukraine. But if the rest of Europe, Germany, Poland, France, the UK, is Nazifying to the extent of committing to permanent war against the Slavs, against the Orthodox, against the Russians, then you can't denazify all of Europe by simply having a series of elections in the Ukraine. So summing that up, this is a serious crisis that's not really being discussed yet at the strategic level in the middle of a domestic political campaign in Russia. And that's the general picture. Into that little picture, but let me suspend for a minute, we get to the extraordinary performance of Russian intelligence disclosed last week in Greece. But let me come to that in a minute, connected to what I've just said. But you go,
Yeah.
Pelle.
Have you got anything, Martin? I was going to say, Peskov, Putin's spokesman, said at the weekend or just before that we're no longer in an SMO. We're in a war, and we're in a war with Europe. And some commentators took that as Russia taking the gloves off, or a rhetoric change, which will presage something more serious. Martin, do you want to add to
Oh,
that? Yeah.
very much so. You've left aside, John, on the most fundamental issue at all. When does this go nuclear? When do they annihilate Paris and London? Because we are already in a situation which is inconceivable during the 44 years of the Cold War. Inconceivable. Never during the Berlin airlift, never during the Cuban Missile Crisis, never during big bad President Reagan or big bad evil President Nixon's time in the White House would any of those highly responsible presidents have tolerated for a moment any local lunatics in gangsters and CIA nuts in CIA firing a single non-nuclear rocket into Russia, let alone what you are pointing out, strategic attacks on oil centers. The Russians haven't forgotten the massacre of 20 plus children, small in numbers, but they were all innocent young girl students, and that school was deliberately targeted. The evidence for that is quite overwhelming. How the Russians are moving, and you yourself have documented this, John. The Russians are moving forward in a very systematic warning matter. President Putin does not want to go to world war, but he is he is being pushed towards it, and he recognizes the need for it. And I think he is tough enough and ruthless enough and dangerous enough. If he is pushed far enough, he will approve and press that button. And if he doesn't, other people are there who may do so. We've crossed so many red lines. The Russians themselves have said the red lines have been crossed. This is not an issue of I believe, anymore of how much more will the Russians take. I don't believe they're going to take any more. The issue is the lunacy and insanity in London and Paris. And I have one further point to add. Pelle, of course, you're a world expert. You've written a definitive work on the origins of World War I, a crucially important work that you've written. I'm rereading it at the moment. I'm going to be rereading it for a third time after I finish my current rereading of it. And something that comes through from you, lots does, of course, but what I'm reading from at the moment is people forget, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, as you emphasize, was a great force for peace, and he was murdered. And he was actually the closest friend and advisor that Kaiser Wilhelm II had. As you point out, we are victims of Western English propaganda, turning the origins of the war utterly inside out, so that the Kaiser and the is presented as the arch monster, and the Archduke as a stupid, warmongering, thick villain, which is the opposite of what he was. The Kaiser was so shocked by the brutal murder, not just of his close personal friend, but also of his close friend's personal beloved wife, Sophie, who was also a friend of the Kaiser himself. That this played a role in destabilizing and approving the fatal approval to Austria-Hungary to go against Serbia, which pulled Germany and Austria-Hungary into the Russian and French trap at the time, which really set off the war, which you have documented, Pelle. The one point I add to this is there a parallel today? I say yes, there is. That would be an Iranian successful, God forbid, may it not happen, but the danger is real, assassination of President Trump. Because President Trump does have a good personal relationship with President Putin. And I believe that President Putin's hope that President Trump can exercise some restraint on NATO and the lunatic idiots in London and in Paris, and Ursula von der Leyen and her neo-Nazi friends posing as liberal interventionists comes naturally to them. If, God forbid, President Trump were to be removed from the checkerboard, the chessboard, as they love to put it, there would be no restraint. Far away, gentlemen.
Speaking of which, I muted my microphone because there are military helicopters above.
Yes, because you and I both live right beside military bases, Pelle.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I am in Sweden, but I'm in Winchester now. I don't know. If there are any military bases.
That's right.
This is where Eisenhower planned D-Day, and there's a Gurkha museum down the road, and Hampshire's museum, and a Royal Tank Museum. So it's a very military town.
Very ironical time for you to.
So I haven't checked out if there are any military bases. Anyway, there's some real-time audio there, But John, yeah, I mean it's my World War One book is like a blueprint, and as I said, I mean the media war against the Germans, which lasted for 20 years, was full of the same newspapers doing the same kind of lies, basically, and the same
exactly the Daily Mail.
It's so hurtful, the language they used against the Germans, so personal, so vindictive, so poisonous, and it's like the British think they're the best in the world. I mean, who the hell do they think they are? That's what Putin said, coming from the wrong side of the tracks of a country that feels it's on the wrong side of the tracks. They know exactly how to poison the atmosphere, and I blame the British press for World War One, because the Germans looked up to the British just as the Russian elite or liberals looked up to the British, and they found themselves not allowed to play with the cool kids, and the same othering that the British used against the German Hun, the German barbarian, the jackboots, all that kind of stuff they use against the Russians today. I mean, anyway,
by the way, just one quick point there, and that is Benjamin Franklin and George Washington found the same English arrogance and contempt, treating them personally as shit 250 years ago.
I didn't know that, actually. Well, that's an interesting thing. So, I mean,
we should do
probably the
biggest
union in the world it'd be the union of everyone against the British, because everyone's been humiliated by them at some point,
and suffered genocide from them. Look what happened to China. Look what happened to India. Look what happened to Russia since the Crimean War.
I mean, the most popular holiday in the world, the most common, isn't Christmas Day. It's the date of your your independence from the British Empire.
We have to do a show on that.
Anyway, we're getting sidetracked, John. We're going to get back
to
Russia.
Not. It's the same thing.
Well, yeah,
Go
it
ahead,
is.
John.
Go and read my book, by the way, because I think they're really timely, and I almost feel as if I'm sitting on a secret, because so millions of people don't know these things, and because they've been reading the Max Hastings style triumphalism about World War One, and they're just insulated by the lies of the descendants of Northcliffe. Northcliffe, that psychotic madman who ought to have been hanged.
Who
anyway,
died of syphilis. Yes.
Yeah. John, sorry. Yeah.
Well, no sense in bringing disreputable people like Max Hastings onto a respectable program like this. I'm not sure I agree with Martin on a crucial issue. The issue facing President Trump and the Russian decision makers is whether there's anything to be trusted in President Trump or any of the officials around him. Putin made a 4th of July greeting to Trump by telegram, and then he had a telephone call on Sunday during the U.S. 4th of July, in the evening of of Moscow's 4th of July. And he continues to take the view that Trump is the one holding back the strategy of permanent war against Russia.
Yes, exactly, John.
And, that's a mistake. In my view, that any view that the United States is not fully committed to this permanent war is a mistake that Putin makes, and an increasingly diminishing number of officials around him. Putin called the Europeans the party of war. He appealed to Trump not to sign the NATO statement, which will come later this week in Turkey at the NATO summit, which will do what the G7 signed last week, and Trump signed it in Evian, France. That is to escalate against the Russian economy, which means increase and intensify the drone war against Russia's energy infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and not only the hinterland of Russia, attacks on Russian vessels on the high seas. Which brings me back to the point at which we began, and that's this extraordinary video, 12-minute video, which two Russian pranksters, they're called, Vovan and Lexus, that's their stage names, in which they pranked a video telephone call with Rustem Umerov, the national security advisor to President Zelensky in Kiev. Athanasios or Thanos Dorkos is the individual, educated in Cambridge and Harvard, very respectably a Western Atlanticist, who's now the national security advisor to Prime Minister Mitsotakis in Greece since 2019. He's an experienced individual. He thought he was talking to Umerov. The brilliance of the Russian intelligence operation, for that's what it was that they had broken the security codes that Athens uses for telephone calls of this nature. Dorkos had, in fact, met with Umerov the week before. Imagine that.
Wow.
He thought he was talking in a video telephone call, much like you see me and I see you on the screen. He thought he was talking to Umerov, but he wasn't. It was an AI construction of Umerov in which one of the Vovan and Lexus was pretending to be Umerov. It completely fooled Dorkos. The brilliance of the intelligence penetration to turn it into a public a joke, which is not the first time these chaps have done this. They've done it in Italy with Meloni. They've done it with the British defense minister in the past. They've done it with Hollande and a couple of other French political leaders. All over the world, they've done this. But this is very important. Let me explain why. Not only have they penetrated, they have published it. Why? They have published their capability to do this and turn it into a joke. That's very important. That means they're capable of listening unpublicized without making public jokes to just about everything that goes in and out of Kiev towards the NATO allies, every one of them. Okay, now that's a breakthrough. They are making it public. The Russian intelligence services are making this public. Second, what are they showing through Dorkos, a relatively minor official in NATO, in the sense that Greece is a small country, a small member state of NATO. Why Dorkos? Because he's small. And here's what he said. In talking to Umerov, they discussed an incident that occurred on May 17 when a Ukrainian naval drone washed up on the west coast of Lefkada Island on the Ionian Sea, on the west of Greece. That has been misrepresented in the Greek press. It's been pretty much ignored outside of Greece. However, what does it mean? Why that incident? Here's what Dorkos said. Dorkos said, we understand the war aims, meaning We support the war against Russia. What we don't support is an accident, his term, or incident, his term, or accident and incident were the pseudo-Umarov terms, where they threaten Greek domestic shipping or the tourism business.
Yes.
To highly significant and sensitive businesses, revenue generators during the summer season, ahead of what Dokos explained was an oncoming Greek election, the date of which hasn't been fixed yet. What does he mean there? He means we support permanent war against Russia so long as it doesn't occur on our territory to our expense. We will support you, Ukraine, in the drone war. And then they went on to talk about co-production of Ukrainian naval drones in a factory or several factories in Greece by a South African company called Paramount, which will be used in the war on Ukrainian territory, and if Dokos' advice is followed, on the high seas, which is exactly where Ukrainian drones are being used all the time already. In other words, what you see here in this 12 minutes is a presentation of how all NATO officials think. They think and are committed. A country like Greece is committed to permanent war with Russia, to weaken Russia, to destroy Russia's power as an energy supplier, as a partner politically, a strategic ally in Europe. That's what they're committed to for the long term. They're also committed to having Trump support it in general, supported in particular, and supported in financing through NATO financing mechanisms, so long as it doesn't cost business revenue and votes at election time. Now, the significance in Greece for Dokos to be saying this for Mitsotakis is that no voter base in Europe is as hostile to this war against Russia as the Greeks. They are the most sympathetic of all Europeans to Russia, and they are most hostile to the war against Russia. And yet, you have Dokos thinking he's speaking in secret in the office of the Prime Ministry in Athens, in Maximou, in the center of Athens, happily talking about war in Russia against Russia. He said, imagine this, gentlemen. He said, why don't you hit a Russian billionaire? A billionaire. And he's essentially saying, assassinate Russian targets, but don't do it in a way that damages our tourist business. He said, unfortunately, not many Russian billionaires are in Greece any longer. They're in Turkey. Imagine, national security advisor, the prime minister of a NATO country, talking about assassinating Russian individuals as a method of war. Now, what we know is that Ukrainians make a regular habit of attempting to assassinate and actually assassinating Russian general staff officers in the streets of Moscow.
Yes.
We know that the Ukrainians last week attempted to assassinate a Ukrainian oligarch named Vadim Yermolayev in Monaco. He still survived. His wife has lost her legs. They're alive. Their child is also injured, but not as seriously. They are alive. But the Ukrainians are getting a green light from NATO, not just Dokos, to do assassination wherever they like. Now, imagine, as Martin said, never during the Cold War, notwithstanding all that you've ever read of Le Carré's novels or Eric Ambler's novels or all the spy genre literature, including that fiction that Ben McIntyre writes in the London Times. Imagine a carte blanche for the first time for assassinating Russian individuals wherever they are, including in Moscow. Imagine that. Okay. Now, what do we come to in the exposure of Russia's knowledge of this is the way NATO officials talk among themselves between the United States and all the European capitals. It's exposing that Russia is saying, we know exactly what you're saying. We know exactly what your plans are. All right? That's the message.
Right.
Now, there's no doubt that the message is the Greeks, among others, believe Trump will come round later this week in Turkey to supporting escalation of the war against Russia. But President Putin refuses to believe this. He pays Kirill Dmitriev, his special negotiator with the United States, to endlessly tweet as if this isn't the case. Now, we then have a serious problem inside the Russian decision-making center. The Putin view is the Europeans want permanent war. It's only the Americans holding them back. We are trying to deter the Europeans by threatening everything, including tactical nuclear weapons. The Europeans are convinced, and the Dokos episode shows you, they are not deterred by any threat President Putin himself makes. Worse, they do not believe that the Russian military capability is currently threatening any European state electorally or in business terms. Yes, Germany, yes, France, yes, the UK, yes, all of the Europeans have been badly damaged by the loss of cheap Russian resources, energy resources. But they have reconstructed and are reconstructing their economic base to facilitate permanent remilitarization. And it's that base that overwhelms, represses, defrauds all of the electorates of Europe in their attempts to stop this diversion of funds. The economic base that's being rebuilt in Europe is just as you said, Pelle. It's the remilitarization, not against Germany now, but against Russia.
Yes.
It will remind all of the way in which Hitler was, or Germany,
Yes.
remilitarized Germany was taken, viewed in the United States, in London, in France, as a major weapon against the real enemy. And the real enemy was the Soviet Union. The real enemy was communism. The real enemy was Stalin, and so on. Well, that's where we're back. I would say we are back in the 30s. I don't
agree.
see that we are, well, let's not overdo the comparisons of World War I, because I don't think the NATO decision makers, including individuals like Thanos Dokos, believe that there's a credible tactical nuclear threat or any form of missile threat by Russia under President Putin's administration.
John,
outside
we've got to wind
Yes.
up, and we got 2 minutes left. What should Putin do to avoid world war, and what will he do? What's your prediction? And will Trump sign this NATO thing, and therefore disappoint Putin by the end of the week? And of course, he'll come on in 2 weeks' time to give us the estimate if the world still exists in 2 weeks. 2 minutes.
It may not. It may not.
I believe President Trump will sign the NATO joint statement because it will reflect the G7 statement. That part of Putin's attempt on the July 4 telephone call will have failed. Second, what was your first request, Pelle?
What should Putin do to restore deterrence or whatever, and what will he likely do?
Well, what he should do and what he will do and what he won't do are so hotly debated right now that I'm finding it difficult to predict. What he should do, to make it quite clear, and this would be very, very visible, is he fires Kirill Dmitriev. He fires him because he has failed to negotiate even a waiver of the US oil sanction against Russia, which has not been extended. It's been extended now for Iran, but not for Russia. He should fire Dmitriev and say Witkoff and Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner are no longer welcome in the Kremlin because they no longer represent good faith negotiation.
And we've got 30 seconds left. Should he fire off any weapons? Should he attack NATO bases in NATO countries? Yes or no?
No, he should not.
He should not. But he doesn't, because he hasn't yet done the job in the Ukraine. He can seal the Ukraine off from NATO by destroying the rail lines in and out of Poland. He doesn't even do that.
So he should do that. Okay. We've got to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much. You're really on fire, John. Hope the world doesn't end up on fire. Thank you so much.
It will end up on fire. It will end up on fire.
It is on fire.
No.
It just depends where you live.
It is on fire, but it is going to be on thermonuclear fire. There is 1 trillion times of difference, and we are incredibly close